Welcome back to the Square State Sandlot podcast. Obviously, today I'm not joined by Kyle or John, so it's going to be a little bit unique in that respect. But I'm still recording. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying. I do want to invite you, for those of you that do like us, like what we're doing, want to support us, if you could just quickly leave a review on wherever you're listening, whether that be on Facebook. You can review our page and say you like what we're doing. It really just helps us get our podcast out there. And then one other thing I wanted to invite you all to do that we usually tack this on to the end of the podcast is in the description for each episode that we put out there. There's a link that lets you put in a voice message to us where you can ask questions, leave feedback, anything like that, anything you want to hear us talk about. So we can feature your voice in there if you want it to be featured in the episode, or we can leave it out and just kind of paraphrase what you're saying and then answer the question. So we really would love to have some fan engagement and hopefully get to hear from some of you guys and get you involved. So with that being said, I'm going to talk about pretty much just a depth of things that have come up in the last week since we last recorded. But I did want to share a little nugget that Taryn Christensen, we've interviewed him before. He's actually going to come on again. He's going to be a guest probably on our next Wednesday episode. So just keep an eye out for that. It's always good to talk to Taryn. Obviously, we talked about his dad pretty in depth last time. This time when he's on, it's probably going to be more of a, I don't know. We're going to talk about BYU because that's his favorite college football team. We'll talk Raiders. Obviously, his dad played for the Raiders, so he's a fan of them. So, like I said, just keep an eye out for that. Kyle should be on that one. If not, it'll be Taryn and I. And then I think John and I will be on this weekend, so keep an eye out for that one as well. I'm just sitting here watching the Golden State Warriors game between them and the Phoenix Suns. Obviously, that's a rematch of the game they played on Tuesday where the Warriors lost. I'll break that down a little bit later on in the episode, but it's been a pretty exciting game so far. So that's what I'm watching while I'm recording this, just in the background. So a question I wanted to pose to Kyle, and this is just moving right into the NFL. I wanted to ask him if he thought the Steelers were done. And the reason I ask that is because they are currently ranked 12th out of the 16 teams in the AFC. That sounds pretty bad, but at the same time, there's, let's see, five teams in front of them that have one more win. The downside to them is they are 5-5-1 with that one tie coming against the Detroit Lions, so that really hurts them in that win column. That's probably a win they should have had and would have put them right into rank 7, tied with the Chargers, somewhere in there. So obviously, that could come back to bite him in the end. I really want to hear Kyle's opinion on this, so maybe I'll save it for him on Wednesday. And obviously, if they win their upcoming game, then obviously a lot of things could change based on how people in front of them do. But in my opinion, they're not looking too good right now. So I know Kyle probably hasn't given up hope yet, and it's tough to do that as a fan, but they looked just awful against Cincinnati in their last game. They lost 41-10. Offense looked non-existent. Cincinnati is a good team, but they're not a great team. Obviously, they kicked the crap out of my Raiders too a couple weeks ago. Raiders were coming off their no, it wasn't. It was the game after they came off their bye, so no real excuse there. Cincinnati looks to be a team on the rise, and the Steelers look like they're heading the other way. So I'm interested to see where they go from here and whether that's a change at quarterback. I don't think Big Ben's the problem here. I think a lot of it's been some injuries that have cropped up in key positions. And in fact, I think TJ Watt's going to miss this upcoming game this weekend with being on the COVID list. So a lot of things going on with the Steelers, not a lot of good news. And really, like I said, I want to see what Kyle has to say about them and if he thinks they're done this season or if they're going to continue on. They do have a game against Baltimore this upcoming Sunday, so that's a tough game to win, division game, so you never want to write them off in that, especially with them being at home. But Ravens are playing pretty good ball right now, and the Steelers are not looking too hot on offense. So we'll see what happens in that game. And then moving on to my Raiders, they have a game at home with Washington coming into town. And Washington coming off that big win against Carolina, and they are at 5-6 for their record. Raiders are 6-5. I'm feeling pretty good about this game. The Raiders have a pretty decent offense, and their defense, while it ranks statistically towards the bottom of the league, I think a couple of those games were outliers where basically the offense wasn't doing anything. Defense was left out there all game. The Cincinnati game comes to mind for sure, where a lot of those points came up in garbage time where the Raiders were just gassed and couldn't stop the offense at all. So I think those stats are a little bit skewed. They have a much better defense this year than they did last year, even though on paper it doesn't look like it. But the talent level on defense is much higher, and they should be getting Trayvon Mullen back soon. Probably not in this game, though. So I look for the Raiders to win this one. I don't know if it's going to be a huge win. Obviously, playing at home is beneficial. For Washington, they're missing Montez Sweat and Chase Young. He's out for the season. Montez Sweat, I think, is more of a week-to-week situation, but those are their two best edge rushers. Interior line is pretty good for Washington, and our interior line for the Raiders is not good. In fact, our whole offensive line is not great other than Colton Miller. So they have been playing a little bit better in the last couple weeks. Desean Jackson, he missed practice, but they said he should be good to go for the game on Sunday. And he obviously had a huge impact in that game against Dallas. 3 catches, 102 yards, and a touchdown. So with that speed element, it helps free up the rest of the players on offense. We won't have Darren Waller for this game. He's been ruled out. So I look for another big game from Foster Moreau. He had a great game when Waller was out last time. So I think this will probably be a lower scoring game. I would probably take the Raiders like 21-17 or something like that. Although if they can get on a roll on offense, it might be even better than that. So I'm picking the Raiders this week. Obviously, I just told you why. So I'm curious to see how they do, just because they haven't played consistently at all this season. They won those first 3 games, but even in those first 3 games, they weren't playing well. They were just doing enough to get those wins, and then obviously, since they were in 3-0, they went 3-5 in that stretch. So total record coming to 6-5. We'll see what happens with that going on. Speaking of the Raiders, the reports coming out from Las Vegas this week were that Mark Davis is not in a hurry to start the coaching search. He wants to see what Bisaccia does with the rest of the season. I think he's made it pretty clear that it's playoffs or bust for a lot of the staff and players on the team right now. So it's obviously a huge season in terms of what happens next with this franchise. I think I think Mark Davis is playing this very well. Mike Mayock still has 1 year left on his contract, so I absolutely think they should bring him back for this upcoming offseason and see how he does in the draft. Even if the Raiders finish outside of the playoffs, I think he should be back on, just because if you go and hire a GM this late in the process, where scouting's already being done by Mike Mayock and his staff, it's going to put you behind the 8 ball, because you're essentially having to hire new scouts, hire a new GM, and get up to speed with all the players in college football. Obviously, if you hire someone that's in an assistant GM role or something like that, they'll have their own draft board somewhat prepared. But internally, if you don't want to go through that giant turnover and going through that you just stick with what's on board. So I love Rich Bisaccia, and I hope that he gets another chance as an NFL head coach, but I don't see him coming back unless it's on a 1-year contract for next season. He's definitely growing as a head coach, but he's shown several times this season that he's probably not ready for the big show just yet. And obviously, as a 61-year-old special teams coach, I mean, when's his time going to be if it's not now? I understand that, but at the same time, some of the decisions he's been making with clock management, and then especially going super conservative when, I mean, essentially his job's on the line. So playing, I wouldn't say scared, but it kind of seems like that at some points. Several times he's he's punted in positive territory on like 4th and short. And obviously, if they're not getting it on 3rd and short, I understand there's not a high likelihood, but most of the time where he's kicking field goals on 4th and 2 or punting on 4th and 2, the analytics say go for it. And he's just not been going for it at all. So it's curious decision making. Obviously, he's 3-3 as a head coach right now, so 500 record, that's not going to get you a job in the league, to be quite honest. So he's got to have a nice stretch run. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised to see Mark Davis, if they make the playoffs, bring him back for one more season and then reevaluate after that. But Mike Mayock, I would for sure pull the trigger on him and just say, hey, this is your last chance, essentially. Make the best of it. Because outside of the Raiders organization, we don't know how much John Gruden had his hands in the draft picks. We just don't. He was the de facto GM, and Mike Mayock was there to do the contracts and basically whatever John told him to do. And I would really like to see if I had to guess, Gruden was making the picks in the earlier rounds, and Mayock and his team was probably making the later round picks, and those are typically the ones that have been turning out well for the Raiders in the last few seasons, and the first, second, third round picks haven't been going so well. So if that's true and that's the pattern, then like I said, I'd like to see what Mike Mayock can do with full control over the roster and see what he does. If he's not great, then obviously next season you can let him go. But earlier in the season, where you can get a new staff instated and all that stuff, where they can set up and get their college players scouted and set up their draft boards and whatnot. Speaking of Washington football team, they obviously drafted Terry McLaurin, but there were plenty of reports coming out this week from, I believe it was Vic Tafur of The Athletic. He said that had the Raiders not traded for Antonio Brown and given up that 3rd round pick, they would have drafted him. And that was coming from Rich Bisaccia, who is the head coach of the Raiders at this point. And that's just devastating to hear, because obviously Terry McLaurin's a hell of a ball player, but we essentially gave up that 3rd round pick to the Steelers and got nothing from Antonio Brown because he was released before the start of the regular season. So if we had not signed Antonio Brown, we have the chance to have Terry McLaurin, because we went before Washington in the draft in that 3rd round, and he was graded out as a 3rd round pick. So obviously things could have happened, but the Raiders went well before Washington in that draft in the 3rd round. So assuming everything would have played out the same way, they would have had an opportunity to draft him. So that's not ideal. But speaking of Antonio Brown, he has a pattern of not paying people that he contracts out to do his work. Latest one is his chef. And so when he didn't pay the chef, I guess he owed him like $10,000 or something like that, which is no small amount. And the chef said, well, if you don't pay me, I'm going to let out some information that you don't want to get out. And that information turned out to be that Antonio Brown used a fake vaccination card, gave it to the NFL, was telling everyone he was vaccinated, which obviously that's not a good scenario there. But so he wasn't following any of the unvaccinated protocols, any of that stuff. So he just got suspended 3 games without pay. So that's going to cost him a hell of a lot more than the $10,000 he should have just paid the chef to begin with, and probably would have not had any of this news come out. So obviously not a good situation where you're trying to cheat the system. And yeah, obviously if you have someone provide services, pay them. So Antonio Brown's probably kicking himself for that situation going on there. Other news coming out from the NFL, we have Christian McCaffrey. He is out for the season, and I think that's pretty much put a fork in Carolina's season. They were looking to make a chargeback when they signed Cam Newton. He played very well in that first game. Christian McCaffrey had been playing out of his mind since he came back from the injury and rolled his ankle and is obviously out for the season now. It's a tough blow for the Panthers. It's also a tough blow for me because he was the first overall draft pick that I took since I had that first overall spot, and hoping that I can recover and make a deep run to the playoffs. Little update on that. I think Kyle's 9-4, and I am 8-5. That doesn't sound right. 9-3 is Kyle. I just beat him, and then I'm 8-4. So we're both pretty much locked to get into the playoffs in our fantasy league. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in that for sure. Both of us kind of on a downturn. I started off 7-0, and Kyle started off 7. He might have been 8-0, and then lately we just had rash of injuries and players that have kind of dipped. So we'll see what happens in the playoffs. We'll definitely keep you guys updated on it and see what you guys think. Still trying to figure out what we're going to do for the picks. Whoever has the worst record in the picks is supposed to be doing something, and then whoever has the best record is supposed to be getting a gift or something. So if you guys have any ideas for that, definitely get them out to us, and we'll be interested to see what you guys have to say on that. So moving on to Major League Baseball. I don't know how many of you follow it, but there's probably quite a few of you that are not happy with what's going on with Major League Baseball right now. Owners decided to lock out the players, and this basically means the players can't report, they can't come into the facility, which there's been several players that have posted, hey, I hurt my ankle or whatever when I was playing baseball and had to have surgery, and now I'm supposed to be doing rehab, but I can't come in the building because the owners decided to lock us out. So obviously that's not a great situation. We all knew it was kind of coming because all the CBA negotiations were not going well. Players and owners had been preparing for this basically since the last CBA. And I don't know why. I think it was about 11 years ago, maybe more recent than that, but that was the last time they did the CBA, and those negotiations were definitely hard fought. Everyone was pissed when they left the table, and it was kind of just a foreshadow to this happening. There was a rash of signings right before the lockout happened. Saw a lot of big names basically signing as quick as they could, because once the lockout happens, there's no more contracts that can be signed, no more trades that can be made, anything like that. So just a couple of the signings that happened. Max Scherzer signed a 3-year deal worth $130 million with the Mets. I think there's an opt-out after that second season, which that is a crazy amount of money. I think that comes out to like $43.3 million annual average value. So I think that's the highest contract in Major League Baseball history if you go on a per year basis. So obviously a big deal for him and big deal for the Mets getting him. They obviously lost Steven Matz to the Cardinals when they thought he was for sure going to sign with them. Their owner got on Twitter and basically cried about the whole situation because he was so pissed, and then kind of just went on a spending spree. He also signed Starling Marte from the A's and Mark Canha from the A's to some pretty big contracts. Obviously, I'm happy for those guys, but not too happy to lose them, especially Starling Marte. Canha was one of those kind of glue guys that just he got on base, whether it's getting hit by a pitcher or walking, drawing a walk, hitting a home run, whatever. Mark Canha was a stud of a player. I think he'll do pretty well for the Mets out there. Definitely a much needed boost for them. And then, like I said, Starling Marte, obviously we traded for him at the deadline last season, and he just tore up the league. Had one of the highest batting averages, if not the highest batting average in the league. Hit some home runs, stole a ton of bases, and really just showed out against the rest of the league. And obviously drew up his market and interest. And I believe he got 4 years and $73 million. Might have been 5 years. I don't know. Lots of money. Marlins basically offered him 3 years, $33 million at the beginning of last season, and he basically doubled that, what he was able to get in a contract. So good move by Starling. Like I said, I'll miss him being on the A's. It was a short stay, but he was an electric player and a ton of fun to watch. Obviously, someone you can get behind easily. The Rangers also made a couple signings. They signed Corey Seager to a 10-year, $325 million deal, and Marcus Simeon signed a 7-year, $175 million deal. Very happy for Marcus Simeon. Not so happy that he's going to be in the division because we'll have to play him 19 times a year. And he's one of those Iron Man players that just, no matter what, he's playing in the game. I think he's played 161 games when he was on the A's, like 3 years in a row. So very impressive player. Love to see him get paid. He only got his 1-year deal last year, and obviously that was coming off that COVID short season. So just like I said, happy for Marcus. Corey Seager, I mean, I think the Dodgers were expecting to re-sign him, and he left, and same with Max Scherzer. So they probably aren't too happy right now, the Dodgers, but they did get their guy, Corey Taylor, back. So consolation prize there, I guess. Question I had asked to me was, when do I think the CBA will be signed and get players back in buildings and whatnot? I really don't know what to say to this. It sounds like they weren't even really talking towards the end of the negotiations, so I don't know if it's just because they knew nothing was going to happen before the deadline, so they just called it off, but I can't see them letting it go into spring training just because the way that spring training is nowadays, it's big business. Like, you're paying full price in those stadiums to sit in the seats. You're paying full price for beers and hot dogs, whatever. Any vendor you go to, it's going to be ridiculous pricing. It's kind of why I've shied away from going to spring training recently. It's going to be one of those back in my day stories, but I remember when you could buy like an annual pass essentially for spring training, and basically you had this pass, and I think it cost like $200, and you could go to any game. You just, general admission, you show your card, you can get right in. But in the last probably 10, 15 years, I think demand has spiked quite a bit. People going to the Arizona one specifically, that's the one I always go to. And now the prices are, you're paying $20, $30 per seat for decent seats, and I think you can even get up to like $80 per seat if you want the good ones. So that's pretty much regular season pricing in the actual venues when you're going to spring training to watch players that probably aren't even going to be on the roster come the end of March. So I can't imagine they'll let it go past that. So you're looking at probably middle of January to early February if you want to get the pitchers and catchers in there to start their program. So I would say, if I had to throw a date on there, I'd say probably January 20th, somewhere in that range, just so players can start to get their plans together to report for spring training. So I don't think it'll be an extended stay, and I'm really hopeful that they have the salary floor instituted where teams are required to spend 100 million on the payroll, and I really hope it doesn't come at the cost of lowering the luxury tax, because that's like we talked about before. That's essentially a pseudo salary cap in baseball when there's not really supposed to be a salary cap in baseball. So most of those owners now are treating that luxury tax as they're not going to go above it. So obviously that suppresses spending, which if you're a fan of a small market team, it sounds good to suppress spending, but really baseball doesn't have a parity issue. There's constantly new teams going to the World Series and winning those things. So I think baseball is set up very well and works very well. And the only thing they want that luxury tax for is to limit how much they'll pay the players. And since there's no salary cap, they want to institute their own by calling it the luxury tax. So anyway, we'll move off that. A couple of news and notes about the Oakland A's. Obviously, they're my favorite team. The one thing that this lockout has done for the A's is it's prevented them from making any moves really in terms of trades. They weren't going to sign anyone, so it's basically just delaying the sell-off, which is why I'm hoping for a salary floor. And the reason I say that is because if they have to spend $100 million to reach that limit, they have 11 players right now that are arbitration eligible. They already reached deals with Chad Pinder and Tony Kemp, brought both of those guys back, and then they got Dale Esguerra as well. So those three guys, they basically equal up to about let's say $6 million between the three of them. So obviously those aren't huge moves. Chad Pinder is a utility star. I mean, he can play anywhere on the diamond as long as he's healthy. He hits well. He's got plenty of pop. Tony Kemp had the best season of his career with the A's last year. Really forced Bob Melvin to put him in there against righties and lefties when traditionally he's been more of a platoon player where he only faces mostly righties, and then they put someone else at second base that can hit lefties a little bit better than him. So like I said, he played out of his mind. If he can continue that, great. He's a cheap option and should see plenty of playing time. And then Dale Esguerra, I think he really worked himself into a bullpen role for this upcoming season. They had him in the long man role, but once a lot of the rest of the bullpen had started to get worn out, they started to throw him in some of the higher leverage situations, and he did very well right up until the end of the season. I think he had a couple rough outings right before the end. So, but with the salary floor, if that's instituted, there's several players that they could bring back to get them above that $100 million salary floor, assuming they don't trade them off, and that's Sean Manaea. I got some projected arbitration numbers from MLB Trade Rumors, and they have Sean Manaea's estimated salary at $10.2 million for next season. Chris Bassett 8.8. Chad Pinder signed for $2.75. They projected 2.8, so pretty much right on the spot there. Matt Chapman 9.5. Matt Olson 12. Tony Kemp 2.2. That's what he signed for. Frankie Montas 5.2. Lou Trevino 2.9. Pete Cosma $600,000, and then Ramon Laureano $2.8 million. So you add those all up, and there's a good chunk of change right there, probably in the range of 45 to 50 million that they could spend just by re-signing those 11 guys. Lou Trevino, that's probably a tough call. He's so hit and miss on where he actually pitches. He'll have stretches where he can't find the strike zone, so paying someone like that $2.9 million, I guess they tendered him a contract, so at some point they're going to have to come to an agreement to pay him either the 2.9 or whatever they bid their arbitration number at. So there's plenty of money to be spent there for the A's to hit that number, and we'll see what they do. Obviously, it all depends on if there's a salary floor instituted, or if there's not, then I think you can kiss all these guys goodbye. Manaea will be gone. They'll trade him. They'll trade Bassett. They'll trade Chapman, Olsen. The only one they might actually hang on to is Matt Chapman, and that's because he's had 2 rough seasons in a row. His value is probably the lowest it's ever been. But if there is no salary floor, they're going to trade away Sean Murphy. They're going to trade away basically anyone with any value, and probably not try to compete this upcoming season, because you've got teams in the division such as the Rangers and Angels spending money, and Houston spending money. So Mariners are spending money, and they played very well last season. So it's looking increasingly likely that the A's will be the worst team in this division for this upcoming season. So not great news, but is what it is. So one thing I forgot to mention at the top is, wearing this Wyoming hat, the Wyoming Cowboys basketball team, men's basketball team, is 7-0 to start the season. So it's a pretty impressive stretch for them. I haven't got to watch any of their games yet, just because not a lot of them are televised, and a good chunk of them have been like middle of the day, 2 p.m., things like that. So hoping to actually catch a couple of these upcoming ones. And they've got one playing against University of Arizona, which is typically a very strong college basketball team. So that should be a pretty good barometer to see where they're actually at as a team, if it's real or if it's just because they haven't been playing too many good teams. And yeah, we'll see how they do. The Warriors game just wrapped up, and I'm not going to spoil too much about it because John will want to talk about it on Sunday. But they played very well today, much better than they played in that first game against the Suns. So speaking of the Warriors, they did beat the Clippers again, and then they lost to the Suns in Phoenix on Tuesday evening. Devontae Booker, no, not Devontae. He's the running back. Why is his name slipping me now? Is it Devin? Devin Booker? Yeah, that sounds right. He got hurt in the first 15 minutes or so that he played, and came off with a hamstring injury. And the Warriors really couldn't capitalize on him missing. They really played sloppy, had 23 turnovers in that game. And Steph Curry, I believe he only had 12 points. They were playing just smothering defense on him, and none of the other guys were really shooting well enough to back that coverage off of Steph and focus on someone else. But despite all that, and really not playing that well, they only lost by 8. And it was in Phoenix. They were held to under 100 points for the first time this entire season. So had a pretty good stretch where they were scoring over 100 points. Had they been able to protect the ball a little bit better in this game, they probably would have had a decent chance to win it. But that's obviously, can't go back and change that now. And unfortunately, this is a problem that seems to pop up quite a bit for the Warriors every season. Even when they were in their stretch run of 4 championships in 5 years or 6 years, whatever it was. Even when they were having those runs, they were having issues turning over the basketball. So I think that tends to just pop back up all the time, and Kerr has to remind them, hey, I love the aggressive play, but let's tune it back just a little bit so we're not turning the ball over and giving the other team extra possessions. And played a lot better tonight, and just still turning the ball over, but not as much. So we'll talk about that more on Sunday when John's on. Some other good news about the Warriors: Klay Thompson and James Wiseman were sent to the Santa Cruz Warriors a couple days ago to get some more practice time in, and then they were recalled to the NBA team, and they are both getting very near to returning. In fact, I wasn't watching super close because I'm recording this, but several times they were pointing the camera at Klay, and I would guess he'll be back in the next week or two, just based on the full clearance for 5-on-5 practice, and obviously getting sent down to get more practice in with the Santa Cruz Warriors. So they're really ramping up his practice time right now and getting him ready to get into an NBA game for the first time, and I think it's been like 900 days. So good for Klay, good for James. I really excited to see how they get them into the rotation and how they're going to use them, and really just I'm going to be holding my breath every time Klay gets on the court, just because of what's happened the last 2 seasons with him getting those fluke injuries. So, lastly, I wanted to talk about college football, and really, it's just been crazy the last week or so. You had Brian Kelly; he has left Notre Dame and is headed to Louisiana State and getting paid a hefty sum to go there. So obviously it's tough to fault him. I really haven't seen any coaches leave Notre Dame. That's more of a destination place where you want to be, but it's tough to fault him. Like I said, 9 years, $95 million. I'd have a hard time turning that down too. So the only thing that I want to say about him is he called the players in for a 7 a.m. meeting and basically took 3 minutes to say, "Hey, I'm leaving. Sorry. See ya." And that was about the depth of the conversation. So pretty weak meeting. Obviously, the guys were probably having to be in there right after that 7 a.m. meeting for weightlifting and practice or whatever they had going on. So not a huge loss to bring him in for that, but man, if I would have been in that meeting, I would have probably just said, I think that could have been over text, because, yeah, there wasn't much to that meeting. And then when they announced him at the LSU basketball game, they gave him a mic at halftime, I believe it was, and he said hi to everyone, and he's so excited to be there, and even busted out a fake Southern accent that apparently he's been working on in the last couple days. So he's been there a day and he's already got a fake Southern accent. So very interesting fella. The other news, Lincoln Riley announced that he's leaving Oklahoma for USC, and this has set off a chain reaction. Spencer Rattler was already probably going to enter the transfer portal, but he entered it trying to leave Oklahoma. Obviously, he was supplanted by Caleb Williams, the freshman that Lincoln went with him over Spencer after a couple rough outings. And then his number one recruit quarterback in the nation was going to go to Oklahoma and withdrew his commitment to them and has now committed to USC. So doesn't look like he's going to lose his commit there. Obviously, that's rough for the program, but great to see that players are now able to basically say, oh, well, I went to go play for him. I don't want to just play for Oklahoma, and can follow the coach that he wanted to play for to his new destination. An interesting question that I would like to pose, and maybe I'll bring this up to Kyle next week, but I don't know if this is good for college football, where essentially we have a record number of players entering the transfer portal, and obviously you got coaches leaving and all that conference reshuffling, and obviously that can play into the players' decisions on why they want to leave. I think there's a bit of an argument for closing that transfer portal during the season. I feel like if you commit to a university, you can at least ride out a full season with them, where you had plenty of players that. Let me just give you an example. Utah, which, shout out to Utah, they just beat Oregon in the Pac-12 championship, and really just dominated them in the game against them previously, and then this game as well. Number 10 or they beat them 10-38 was the final score. So impressive there. But the record I was going to, or the example I was going to give is Utah started the season with Charlie Brewer, who was a transfer portal they picked up, and he was just, I don't know, he was highly touted and really just didn't play well at all. So he got benched after I think it was the third game, or maybe it was halfway through the third game, and he entered the transfer portal because essentially he got benched, didn't want to be there anymore. So obviously, like I said, I'm happy the players are able to do it, but it seems pretty weak to just decommit in the middle of a season where you've just because you get benched or something like that. So I don't know what needs to change or if anything needs to change, but it's just a weird situation where you can basically be like, oh, coach talked to me wrong, so I'm going to enter the transfer portal and go somewhere else. It's just, I don't know. It doesn't seem to have degraded the product at all because you've still got records amount of people watching college football, but I don't know. It just seems to really dismiss the notion that it's an amateur sport essentially. And like I said, these players are now getting paid through NIL, name, image, and likeness. They can benefit off that, but they're still not making any of the money that they're giving to this crazy amount of dollars that they're giving to these coaches. Like, I don't know. You've got Brian Kelly, like I said, 9 years, $95 million. I think Lincoln Riley's right up there in that range as well. So coaches can get paid $10 million a year. I think players can probably make it, rent money or something like that in the season, not just from selling their name, image, and likeness. But one thing I will say, Wyoming, they have Sean Chambers. He's probably played his last snap with Wyoming Cowboys. They got Levi Williams that I believe he was a sophomore this season. Might have been a freshman. I can't remember. I don't think they counted last year against him, so he's probably still a freshman. He's played well at times, but I don't think he's the answer at quarterback. And you've got all these transfer portal quarterbacks, and you would think that Craig Bohl, with the record of having Josh Allen going to the NFL, you would think he's got some pull with some of these recruits, and he can maybe get a higher tier quarterback to come to University of Wyoming in hopes that he can go to the NFL as well. So I think he's really got to hit that transfer portal and see if he can bring a higher level quarterback to the program, even if it's a junior or senior. I mean, if you can get him for 1 year until Levi Williams is ready, get him. And Bohl has shown when he has, I mean, I think any college coach, if they have an NFL caliber player or NFL caliber quarterback, can win. But that's been the only way that Craig Bohl has won at Wyoming, is when he had Josh Allen. So I think what UW needs to do is force Bohl to renegotiate his contract and basically pull back on the base salary, put more incentives up there so he can still make what he was going to make if he wins X amount of games. Because quite honestly, he's the highest paid coach in the Mountain West Conference, and we've talked about this, and he's just not winning games. You don't pay someone more than anyone else in your conference to not win championships, and that's got to be the goal, and quite honestly, he's fallen quite short of that. So I do like Craig Bohl. I think he's a good coach, but I think he's been quite stubborn with his offensive coordinators and opening the playbook and getting the team to, really just stretch the field. It's been so much of the same, and doesn't matter who the coordinator's been. I thought Vegan was the problem, but Vegan leaves and it's basically just crept right back up. So he's got to do something. He's got to make some changes because, quite honestly, like I said, if you're top paid in the conference and you're not winning conference championships, there's something wrong there. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed. Mostly just me rambling, but we should have John on Sunday, and then, like I said, watch for Taryn. Kyle may be on. I don't know. He's back on his long stuff at work, so he might not be on. But Taryn and I will be on Wednesday, and I believe John and I will be on Sunday. So watch for those. And as always, we appreciate you guys tuning in, sharing when we put these posts out there. You guys share them, like them, leave your comments. Get some questions into us. We'd love to have some of that fan engagement and get you guys involved in the podcast. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoy your weekend. Mine's starting right now. So you guys take care. We'll talk to you soon.